session is being recorded with the exception of the breakout rooms that you're going to move into later on. To minimize external disruptions, please be sure to keep yourself on mute unless you are called on. And I'm just gonna make sure that we're admitting folks. The chat room feature has been enabled and is being monitored by Zach Little. For those of you that don't know Zach Little, he is a graduate of the class of 2019. He is a corporate and communications administrator at Kennebunk Savings Bank. He is witty, he is smart, he is a dad, and he's just an all-around good human. And if you haven't had a chance to meet Zach, I suggest you find a way to. When I took a look at the registration list, I realized that there's many of you here this morning that haven't actually participated in Leadership Seacoast. So welcome, it's fantastic that you're here. I wanted to be sure to let you know a little bit about what we do and why we do it. Leadership Seacoast is a local nonprofit. We deliver a community leadership program to existing and emerging leaders in the Seacoast. Over a course of 6 months, the class participates in opportunities to discover and explore topics that impact our community. Topics of study include health and human services, arts and culture, economic development, just to name a few. Participants of the program have the opportunity to learn from decision makers, influencers, and experts related to each topic of study. The ultimate goal is to raise awareness about issues that impact every city and town in our community. Many graduates go on to participate on school boards, nonprofit boards, planning boards, some even run for statewide positions. Other graduates find that they're called to volunteer for various nonprofits. Some are inspired to create their own projects. But every graduate leaves with an expanded awareness of how the Seacoast community works and how we're all connected. We've been delivering thoughtful, dynamic, engaging programming for more than 30 years, and we'll be releasing details about our 2021 program soon and how you can apply. So please be sure to hop over to www.leadershipseacoast.org for more information. Please note our website is getting updated, so pardon any dated out information that's out there right now. And you can also email me for more information, and my email is director@leadershipseacoast.org. Since we're a nonprofit, I would be remiss in mentioning that we do accept tax-deductible donations, and we would be grateful if you would be willing to support us. Without support of community and businesses in the area, we wouldn't be able to continue to do what we do and deliver this kind of programming. The session today is part of our grad school program and is typically only offered to participants who have completed that core program. But today we felt the pull based on the topic to open this up to a wider audience. It is our belief that participation, shared knowledge, expertise, and personal perspectives broaden understanding and help establish a foundation for healthy open dialogue. So welcome to everyone who's here. The goal of today's session is to use Leadership Seacoast as a platform to provide you with the opportunity to hear from a panel of local activists and policymakers about the importance of recognizing racial and gender inequality here on the Seacoast, and to share tangible ways to move the conversation forward towards a more just community. The views and opinions that are shared today reflect those of the panelists and not necessarily the representation of Leadership Seacoast. Okay, so let's get to it. Could I ask the panelists to take a minute to introduce themselves? And I don't have any particular order that you're going to go in, so take it away. Don't make me call. Joanna.
I knew that was going to happen. I felt it.
Uh-oh.
It's Joanna, or most people as Joe Kelley. I am one of the founders and owners of Cup of Joe in downtown Portsmouth. I also sit on a couple nonprofit boards. Most recently, the one that I hope you all have heard of is Pop Up Portsmouth, or as we go by a different name, but the pop-up Portsmouth Bridge Street lot project, which is really, really exciting. I also sit on the board of the Seacoast African American Cultural Society, SAC. Please check out a little shout out. We have a great Obama exhibit opening up soon. I sit on the board for Big Brothers Big Sisters, and I'm also a big sister myself for the last 6 years. That organization is most dear to my heart as I was a little, and I sometimes still consider myself a little because my big is to be really blunt, the mother I never had. We have been in each other's lives now for 26 years and have like day-to-day contact. A little bit diving kind of down that road, I grew up in and out of the foster care system right here in New Hampshire, primarily in Somersworth and in Rochester. Then attended UNH for a bit and then kind of wound up in Portsmouth where I kind of hit the ground running. So I'm really excited to be here today. Recently, one of the big events that I organized, I had a lot of support, was the Portsmouth United rally on June 7th, which was in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And we had well over around 4,000 people. The majority of that local New Hampshire residents. In that I really wanted to give a platform for people of color. You know what I mean? I often hear the conversation that, you know, we don't have a lot of people of color in our state, which is true, but we have a very strong community of people of color. So my goal was really to give a platform, and we had, you know, over 21 people of color, ranging ages from 9 years old up until their 70s speak. So it was a really beautiful event. And it was, if any of you came, I want to thank you. It was really wonderful to see that support from my community. Because again, I love this town, I love this community, I love this state, and I do a lot to try to give back to it. And so it was really beautiful. And at the end of it, if you were there, you saw I got really emotional because it was beautiful to feel that support from my community. So nice to meet you all. I'm really excited for this event.
Thanks, Joanna. Emmett?
All right, so since I'm also a Rochester Somersworth kid, I'll go next. Born in Rochester, raised in Somersworth, and really haven't left much, except for a small stint. You know, I think a lot of times, and this reflects some things Joe just said, we listen to stories about how people describe our communities without actually looking at the communities themselves. And so I left Somersworth for some time. I traveled the world. I got a master's degree at the London School of Economics. But I decided to come home because I believe that there was a community that was more vibrant, that was more diverse than I had been told growing up. And I wanted to do anything I could to support that. And so many of you LS grads probably are familiar with what I'm sitting in front of. It's the teetotaler backdrop. It was wonderful to welcome you here for Economic Development Day. The last 10 years in Somersworth, I have been a small business owner and an activist on Main Street, somewhat of a provocateur. And I have found that being a small business owner has allowed me to express my values, social values, progressive values, in particular in support and advocacy for the LGBTQ community, and really making sure that all of our communities, all of the spaces that inhabit our communities, not just our big cities, provide welcoming, inclusive, and celebratory spaces for people, regardless of their gender identity, their race, their immigrant status, their recovery background, or substance use background. And that's what my cafe has been for a long time. And so sometimes it seems to bleed between being a small business place and just a hub of energy and community building and community gathering. I've been the vice chair of Arts and Reach, which is a 21-year nonprofit to support teen girls by building artistic community and mentorship. I was formerly the program director for Farmers First Africa, which helped develop food security solutions in the southern Sahelian region of Africa. And yeah, I'm just delighted to be here to see lots of your faces again and have a much needed conversation for leadership up and down in our state.
Awesome. Thank you, Emmett.
So I will just throw it over to Crystal, my city councilor.
Thanks, Emmett. Hi everyone, I'm Crystal Paradis. I live here in Somersworth. I was actually born in Portsmouth, so still within the Seacoast here. Grew up in Portsmouth, Kittery, Elliott area, and went off to college in Tennessee, came back for a while, lived out in Hawaii, lived in Honolulu for 4 years. And then I also moved back about 11 years ago now. So I'm currently a city councilor here in Somersworth. I decided to run for office last year. And it's definitely been a very interesting year to be a public elected official for the first time in 2020. 2020 has been a little weird. So I've been an organizer and an activist for a number of years. I really got started when I worked in public health out in Hawaii. I worked in support of community health centers and really became aware of this thing called the social safety net and different programs that were available to help what would have been families like mine growing up if we had known about some of these programs. And so when I moved back, I really started jumping right into volunteering first at Families First in Portsmouth, and then with all sorts of initiatives over the last several years. I ended up working in 2016 for a presidential campaign. Before that, started writing a series of feminist op-eds in Seacoast Sunday, and just really started getting into activism. I was learning things, and my way of stepping up and sharing them was to write these op-ed pieces, which are still probably some of the things that I've done that I'm the most proud of, is writing those pieces. A couple of years ago, I started Feminist Oasis, which is a sort of a group that I organized around how can we take fun events and explore intersectional feminist values in action with them. So an example is our very first event was a screening of Beyonce's Lemonade, and we had a couple of Black feminist scholars break down that film with us afterwards, and that was a really great event. But we tried to pick some fun entertainment or cultural things and discuss them with an intersectional lens. And if you're not familiar with the term intersectionality, it's the concept has been around for a while. The term was coined in 1989 by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, but it's really become a buzzword, particularly around police brutality and recognition of race and gender and class and all different types of identities that people hold that can overlap and not just become more complex the more identities that you hold, but actually create a very unique experience. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that concept a little later on. But yeah, I have been serving on city council this past year. I was really excited just last week actually to join the board of SOS Recovery. I also do some work with the New Hampshire Women's Foundation as a consultant, and am involved in a variety of other community and volunteer initiatives. And I will pass it over to Najee.
Thank you, Crystal. I'm Najee Brown. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I have the privilege of living in Elliott, Maine for the past year now, almost a year. Got here September. So my background's a little different because I wasn't born here. I grew up in Brooklyn in a very rough neighborhood, and eventually I found theater as a way to, find my voice. Do that, I started working with this company called the Children's Theater Company in a play called Henry Box Brown, which is about a slave who ships himself to freedom. We took that play to Scotland twice. We also took it to different cities in the US. With them, I also wrote a musical called Glimmerings of Hope that got to go to Michigan, and we worked with families in Flint, and students in Flint, Michigan, basically teaching these Black children about their nobility and how important it is to see themselves, as just valuable pieces to this society. And that was a powerful experience for me. As a playwright, I wrote a play called The Bus Stop, which Joanna Kelley's in. It's about 5 African-American women waiting at a bus stop where the bus takes them to a prison where their male loved ones are incarcerated. So it's about the prison system, but from the families that are left behind. The reason why I wrote that play was because it's my story, being a son of teenage parents, and my father was incarcerated for most of my childhood. So I wrote this story to educate people about what the prison system is like from the perspective of the families. And that currently will be performing almost 11 shows at Seacoast Rep this summer. So if you guys are, just a shameless plug, if y'all are interested, y'all can come through. But right now I'm currently serving as an artist in residence. The reason why I'm here is I'm currently serving as an artist in residence at the Greenacre High School of Learning in Elliott, Maine. That's the reason why I'm here. And with Greenacre, we have been using the bus stop and other things to engage with students and have these conversations with students about the power of words and race. And oh my God, I think the children here, the youth here are so intelligent, and we don't give them as much credit as they deserve. Because honestly, if you were to hear them talk collectively, they honestly have better answers than us about what to do about these problems. And just empowering the youth, it's been so amazing, and helping them to find their voice the same way theater and my mentors helped me to find my voice. I don't know if I'm allowed to share this, but we've also been working with the Elliott Police Department and meeting with them frequently and having conversations about race and what's been going on. And just to watching the transformation in these officers has been powerful alone, and helping them to understand things that from my perspective as an inner city Black man, and just hearing their perspective as people who've grown up and lived in this area has been powerful. But let me see if I got everything. I currently just accepted a position as a curator for a series called the Soul Series at Seacoast Rep, where we will be exploring stories about, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And just honestly, with every play, I'm all about discourse, having these kind of conversations that we're going to have after the play to help further educate people and to gain a new perspective with everything that we do. So I'm really excited about that position, along with town halls that will, put the focus about issues of people of color that live in this area. And I'm so excited. So I'm a new guy. Welcome me. Thank you for having me for the past year. And I'm excited to help everyone and assist everyone to make the Seacoast a better area. So that's my spiel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited that you are here. All of you are here with us today. And I can't wait to hear all of the stuff that we're going to talk about. So just to kick off the opening question, I would love it if you guys could talk to us a little bit about what is your why? Help us understand what your personal experiences were and how that has inspired you and moved you to focus on this topic and make it a passion project for you. And I know that you're going to make this a very organic conversation. So I am not going to call on anyone to start first. I have a feeling I know who's going to kick off the conversation. But yeah, let's get into the nitty gritty about how you got to where you are right now.
I'll jump in. And again, I do hope my other panelists, we can just kind of have that organic back and forth. One of the things, I recently spoke at a rally in Rochester, and if you've ever seen me speak much like this, I don't always write things down. I just really love to feel it and kind of speak within the moment. And one of the things when I was speaking that I said that I never said before I think out loud was, for the first time in my 32 years, I was really proud to be a Black woman. Growing up in this area, I grew up, again, in and out of the foster care system, but my family's primarily white. I don't really have a relationship with my family. So race was never a conversation that was very openly had in my family. I jokingly say, but in all seriousness, I didn't even realize I was Black until somebody made a negative comment about it when I was in 4th grade. I just knew, my cousins, these are my cousins, these are my grandparents, these are my friends. And then somebody made a comment, and I can remember that exact comment, that exact person, the exact place we were. So I never saw anyone that looked like me growing up in this area. And And so, you know, as I have grown up and, you know, developed different social circles, and it was really important for me to become a face. I'm definitely not the only face. And I, you know, when Lori asked me to do this, I mentioned, like, you know, I don't represent every Black person in the Seacoast, but if I have a platform, I felt like it is my duty in my job to share that platform with other people, and to give people, how do I say it? It can be a really alienating experience here. If you are not potentially a straight white male and female here. For any of us that are slightly different, it is the double-edged sword of New Hampshire, right? We are this beautiful oasis kind of tucked away. We are very self-reliant. We construct these beautiful communities. Within that, there are smaller communities that sometimes don't get to experience kind of the same reality that the masses do. So yeah. So it's, you know, there are definitely moments, and as I've educated myself over the last, you know, 5 to 6 years on really what racial issues look like, what race looks like in this area, what race looks like nationwide, it's been really interesting conversations. Najee and I, through our play, have become really close friends. And, you know, some people may think, oh, they're two Black people, they know. We could not be more polar opposite in the way that we view certain things societally. You know, we've had conversations where he said, I can't believe someone said that to you. And I'm like, what do you mean? That that could be a bad racial comment when said from, you know, a white peer. I just thought, like, that was what people said, because growing up at some point, it to some of the, you know, people of color here becomes a point of survival to assimilate a little bit. Pardon my language, but there is this stigma of the Black bitch, the angry Black woman. And so if something is offensive to me, that very well is in with right to be offensive. Times if I get angry about it, which anyone would, I'm now put in a category. I'm now put in a category where my opinion doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how educated I am. It doesn't matter how many facts and statistics I throw out to support that argument. I'm now in a category. So that has been a really interesting thing to kind of dive into. And it really, I didn't really, again, realize it until I was an adult woman. I had an undiagnosed autoimmune disease that I fought for 6 years. 6 years. And I had doctors tell me I was crazy, I was depressed, I was this, I was that. And it took me going into Boston, and again, still fighting, for a doctor to tell me that I have a really serious autoimmune disease. I have lupus that untreated could cause lifelong effects, but I'd had countless doctors, and it's you know, an implicit bias, and it's a systematic and systemic issue. You know, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth. You know what I mean? There's studies, you know, from 16, that first and second year medical students, you know, these are the people that we hold to a high esteem, thought that African American people had thicker skin. So without these conversations, and I never realized that, you know, there were these issues that affected my day-to-day, right? Until I started to get more educated about it. And so I started meeting the Najees and the Ronells and the people from other areas, and people from our area, you know what I mean, that said, hey, you know, doesn't this seem a little weird? But you, again, it can be kind of isolated. So you think, like, no, that was just my experience, right? Like, it's not like that everywhere. And the sad truth is, for, you know, the 4 panelists here, most of our experiences are not unique. So there you go.
Joe, if I could just trail off on that for a second, and I think Lori probably thinks I'm here to just talk about about a bunch of queer stuff, but I actually, what you said really resonated with me, because I think for those of us that did grow up Rochester, Somersworth, or the whole Seacoast, we did have a lot of indoctrination of how white we were. And as a white person, I repeddled those stories. And in some ways they were really myths, because I can recall leaving New Hampshire thinking it's the whitest place on earth. And yet having memories and experiences, knowing that I would interact or see, even if not engaging, even if not building community with communities of color. And in particular, in Somersworth, I remember moving back and visiting an Indonesian and Thai restaurant off the highway, and never having had Indonesian food, and started to strike up a conversation with the owners. And at the time, my dad was the mayor, and he was trying to build community with different communities. And it turns out that Somersworth and Rochester and Dover had the largest population, Indonesian population in New England at the time, and per capita in the country. And yet we never talked about these groups of people, these minorities. We never talked about them or saw them, because they weren't in the same way that we thought daily life was. They weren't our teachers at schools. They weren't our city officials. They weren't the business owners of the businesses we patroned. And so I think when we tell myths about how white a region is, a lot of times there's a class perspective to it. There's a language perspective to it, because if I'm not talking with them, they must not be here. So here I was as a kid thinking, oh, New Hampshire's all white. That's because there was no mechanism to invite me to an Indonesian church, or to be interested in wanting to cross the threshold into spaces that felt, oh, I don't speak the language, so I'm not welcome here. And I think, food service is a particular pointed example. We go to a lot of restaurants where a lot of the wait staff or back of house are people that speak a different language. A lot of times there's a lot of restaurants where there are people of color. I mean, if you go to anywhere on York Beach, it's like totally exaggerated the differences between front and back. And so I think there's a lot of ways in which the visibility of people of color, the visibility of folks that come from a different ethnic background, speak a different language, are not in the circles that we hail as what the Seacoast is. And then we believe, that kind of perpetuates and kind of continues on about how we tell the story about, well, if they're not in power, if they're not our teachers, if they're not our city councilors, they must not be there. But they are definitely there.
Yeah, thanks, Emmett. I wanted to go back to just something that Joe said as well about using your platform. And I was thinking a lot about the title of this, which the subtitle of which is to use your power to undermine all of these systems of oppression. And I was thinking about your original question, Lori, about our why of how we got so passionately involved in whatever form of social justice work we're doing. And I really think, again, like going back to growing up in the Seacoast of New Hampshire, but growing up in a family that did not always know if we had food for dinner, that was very economically insecure, and wasn't really a thing that I realized was different from everyone else. I just figured, oh, everybody has this same economic status, and maybe there are rich people that do fancy things like go to McDonald's or something, was like an example of something I thought like rich people do. It wasn't really until when I started writing those op-eds, I really feel like it was because I felt like I didn't really have a lot to lose. It wasn't because I felt like, oh, now that I have a platform, I'm going to use it. It was more, I'm seeing these injustices and I'm outraged, and I can be the one that speaks up on these quote unquote controversial topics because I don't feel like I have a lot to lose. I'm fine going back to working at cafes. I'm fine picking up that dishwashing job again. Like, these are not jobs that I feel like I am in danger of losing. So therefore I can speak up about them. And something that I learned was, I had at the time, like probably the best paying job I'd ever had. I was working at a marketing agency, and I was talking to a colleague of mine who I never would have thought had this compassionate streak. It was, somebody that, one of those colleagues that just continually jokes around about things and is sort of the clown of the group. And I mentioned to him one day that I was just like really upset about the opioid epidemic, and somebody I knew, or somebody that friends of mine knew anyway, had just been one of the most recent cases of somebody who had died of an opioid overdose. And I just brought this up thinking like, he's not going to really respond. And he immediately just like dropped his guard and said like, oh my God, my cousin is going through the same thing. And I ended up sort of organizing this Let's Talk About the Heroin Epidemic at the music hall event and bringing people together, because it's sort of, you know, once you bring up the conversation about whatever that tough topic is, you don't realize that the people around you who are just like joking and going through their everyday lives are also going through that same experience. And I think that's something that Joe and Emmett just brought up, of you always think something is unique to you, but if it's unique to you, if it's something that you feel really strongly about, chances are there's a lot of other people just like you who are feeling that and maybe are covering up that hurt. And so taking that extra step to speak out about that thing, even if you're worried about it being a controversial topic, is something that can really open that door of conversation. And the more I saw that little by little, sort of the more bold I became in just saying like, you know what, as long as I'm secure that I actually am speaking the truth and I'm doing it from a place of, you know, not attacking someone else, but really explaining this is my experience, or these are my feelings, or these are the experiences that I'm seeing around me. That's a way that we can really step up and use whatever platform we have. And if we don't have one yet, we can certainly create one, especially in the age of the internet. Yeah.
You know, just before you jump in, Najee, I just want to what Crystal said. And I think that this is a conversation that we don't, like the inequality conversation is one that we don't always have a lot of. You know, in 2019, I ran for Portsmouth City Council, and one of the things I repetitively, probably like ear bleeding, had a conversation about was the food insecurity of the kids in our school district. And, you know, the people that live out on Route 1 that, you know, live in more affordable housing but don't have sidewalks to walk on when they're dependent on buses to get to jobs. And that there's so much inequality in our beautiful, you know, wealthy, amazing community that isn't being talked about, right? So I was angry, and, you know, it caused me to say like, this is ridiculous. Like, you don't have to like what I'm going to say, but it's true. And we need to talk about it, because while we have all these other things that we need to worry about, these people don't have food to eat, you know, much like a Crystal experience. I remember going to food banks, and I jokingly say to my husband now, I know when things really expire, don't throw it away. But that's a reality of our community and of every community. And I just remember being so angry when I talked to a friend of mine, and, you know, she lived out in Patriots Place, and her car broke down and she had to get her son to daycare. And she's like, I felt so unsafe on I was on Route 1 with a stroller trying to get to the bus stop. And I just remember saying, that's ridiculous. That we are letting down our citizens. We are letting down our people. So sorry, what she said just really impassioned me, and I felt the need to share that. Najee.
That was good, Joe. No, my experience is totally that. Well, honestly, it's weird because we're the same and different in a lot of ways. And same here, growing up in New York. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon either. I did have to go to the, you know, the food programs and things like that. And, you know, having, you know, a teenage mom, like, life was just very difficult. But she always did the best that she could, especially with my grandma. But, you know, the reason why I'm so passionate about this is because it's the life that I lived. About 3 years ago, my grandmother woke up, my whole family woke up with guns in their faces. You know, cops came in, bust down the door, and did what they had to do and put them on the floor for 3 hours in search for a gun. You know what I'm saying? And this has been my life, you know, my entire life, since, you know, ever since my father committed that crime 3 months before I was born. I have childhood friends that are gone, and I don't think where I come from, I don't think we expected to even live long, because it was just that violent. And my position here is really to honestly educate people about the America that they wouldn't have the privilege to see. Because honestly, it seems like people just don't know what's going on in the rest of the world. They almost treat it like it's a myth, or the rest of this country, honestly. But I guess that's a privilege to not, educate or just even know about it or even feel something about it. I believe that, you can know something and then you can understand something. But once, Robert said it, once you start to feel something, it becomes totally different for you. And I want to make people feel something about what's going on in this country. Because that life, for some of the people that I left, it still exists. It still exists. It still exists. Like about 5 years ago, my childhood best friend was murdered. And the first thing they did was they pulled up his criminal record, even though it had nothing to do with his murder at all. He was robbed. And that's the kind of life that I come from. But by telling these stories through theater, and by telling these stories just by speaking out, I've been able to help people understand that there is a whole nother America that exists for people. And you should do something about it. You should want to do something about it. You should want to help. You should want to, just to find out about it. Like, you go about your everyday life, your coffee shops and all this other stuff. No, that's not against you, Joe. I just know that people like coffee out here. You should go to Joe's coffee shop. It's amazing. I go there all the time. But like, you go through life every day, you just don't realize that there are people who are Americans too that have a totally different experience than you. Mm-hmm. And like, how can that be? But then when you start to research, because the reason why I started speaking out here was because of a conversation that I had with an older gentleman who said that it just came up to me, honestly, randomly, and was like, "Oh yeah, Black people need to pull themselves by their own bootstrap." And I'm like, "Oh no, he didn't." But I listened because I've been told to respect my elders, and I listened to him, and I heard his point of view, and I didn't get the privilege to share my point of view. But I'm like, you know what? There needs to be some kind of education that goes on, and from that, like, that's why I decided, okay, I'm gonna do the bus stop here. I was already done with the bus stop because we performed it in New York City. But my whole life has been about this. I've been pulled over by cops twice and harassed. And if I were to respond any differently, I could have been a Trayvon Martin. I could have been a Sandra Bland. Like, literally, people were stopping to record because there were 8 officers around me, touching me, grabbing me, doing whatever they wanted to do to me. And this happened twice, 2 blocks away from my home. This is not a game. This is not a myth. This is real. And both times I was working in the church as a youth minister. I was literally coming from like helping youth. And this is what happened to me. So you can be dressed a certain type of way. You can wear a do-rag. You can wear a suit. But if you have this skin color, this is your reality. And we need to do something about it. We need to feel something about it. We need to educate ourselves about this because this is the reality of our country. And until we feel led to do something about it, then guess what? This country is not free. This is not liberty and justice for all. It does not exist if this is what's happening to our own citizens because of the color of their skin. Y'all feel me? But good. All right, thank you. I'm off my soapbox.
Emmett, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm a chatty Cathy, sorry. I think to touch on one of the things that Najee said, it's the duality of life, right? And I think that touches on all communities that are different. I think it definitely touches on the LGBTQ community and the Black community and the intersection of kind of that and the isolation of it. I think that when we talk about it, I think the conversation of assimilation really needs to be brought up, is that we're kind of pushed to if you look a certain way, if you dress a certain way, don't offend anyone, don't be too you, don't be too this, don't be too that. It's just baffling to me. And I think that when I've seen it locally, I have a relative of a very close, I call her relative of mine, who's a young person, a young transgendered person. And that person, he's also a Black person. And so to see, those two worlds and have to educate myself on that, nobody is an expert in anything. And I'm sorry, nobody's an expert in everything. And so it's constant learning of it. knew a lot about, you know, the LGBTQD community. I thought I was a good advocate for them. It was something I was always passionate about, conversations I always had. And then here it was on my doorstep, and I said, oh my goodness, I need to learn more. I need to be a better advocate. And I think what we all need to always think about is that I tend to focus on kids and on youth because I personally just know what it felt like to be kind of an alone kid and what that can kind of do to people. But I think, you know, series like this are so important because we need to hear from people. You know, I need to hear from Emmett and Crystal and Najee's perspective because I'm not an expert on everything. And so, Emmett, I'll kick it away.
No, that's very similar to what I want to say. I think when we talk about education, like we need to educate ourselves about race, about gender, about sexual orientation. That isn't just some academic concept. A lot of that education is actually about going into communities and engaging with people and crossing thresholds that your worldview has just kept you from seeing. Or maybe it's kept you from driving north over the General Sullivan Bridge and entering communities. And, you know, I think if some of you are asking like, oh, here's this white dude on a panel about race and gender, I had the same question because I was thinking, okay, I may be part of the LGBTQ community, but I'm not a visible, underrepresented group. We think of it as an invisible one. But so much of what my work has been as a business owner is recognizing that visible minorities are still made invisible. And so I'd just love to give you an example of that, where I can remember after, you know, I have a master's degree in sociology. I have, you know, a undergraduate degree in gender and women's studies. I feel like I'm an expert, right? And I remember the first time an employee of mine said that they were transgender and that they were actually transitioning. And that interaction, that personal experience was far different from what I thought about academically, what I thought about from the perspective of my education. And it occurred to me, though I have this very colorful, very queer cafe in Somersworth, New Hampshire, even then, several years ago, I wasn't aware of the trans community that existed around me. And so much of it I recognized was actually, even though I was raising the flag, was because this was a community that was made invisible through economic labor. Most of the folks that I have hired to, whether baristas, general managers, some of them are on here today, and it's great to see you. Their previous job was back of house. It was in a warehouse opening and closing boxes. It was as a dishwasher, because economically we've seen a lot of employers not having the wherewithal, not having the understanding, or truly having prejudice of not wanting trans people to be in the public view, not wanting them to be representing their company. And so what happens is all these wonderful, talented, incredible people who happen to be trans or are transitioning aren't seen in the public. And so that when you poll people, any person off the street, they'll say they've never met a trans person. And there's really two takeaways from that. First, they may not know that they've met a trans person. I mean, that is definitely, we know that to be true. But second of all, the conclusion should not be, well, therefore the trans community doesn't exist, or the trans community isn't, there aren't trans people in my community. It's that the economic system and the sort of labor system pushes those minorities to be invisible, to be unseen. And, I know, so I saw Rochester City Councilor, Palana Belkin, hosted an event here at Teetotaler, many of you actually I think went to, called Ask a Trans Person Anything. And it was literally that simple. They got 5 or 6 trans people, trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming panelists, and a packed house of what I would call townies, just a bunch of folks from Somersworth and Berwick, Maine, and to just ask questions. It was all, respectful. There was no heckling, but it was to acknowledge and say out loud what was a reality for a lot of trans folks is they're here, they're working, they're everywhere, but you may not have the moment to stop and enter their community, enter in an interaction with them. And I have to say, as a white cisgender male business owner, the only ways in which I have become sort of a social justice LGBTQ activist is actually out of an economic necessity. You know, we're obviously in a different times these couple months, but flash forward to last year, you ask any restaurant owner, any Main Street business owner, they can't find anyone, they can't find employees. You know, we were almost at full employment. And for us, we felt very fortunate because we had this mantle of being supportive and celebrating the trans community and the queer community, that we weren't going to put people that seemed different or looked different in the back of house. We're going to have them as management. We're going to have them running programs. We're going to have them, you know, being our baristas and so forth. And so that actually allowed us, just purely economically, purely from a capitalistic perspective, we struggled less with hiring because we were able to tell folks that otherwise had limitations in the employment market that we want your talent, we want your work ethic, we want your attitude, we want your creativity. And that helped our cafe actually be more resilient economically. And that really, you know, it wasn't out of me thinking I'm so great, I'm an activist, whatever. It was quite literally recognizing that the barriers that they were facing elsewhere was really an opportunity to unleash potential for our small business. But just as like to kind of wrap up that point of what, you know, Najee and Joe was saying, I think when we think about education, it's actually about your community education. What are the stories you tell about your community? Who's in it? Who isn't in it? Who's just outside of it? And what's preventing you from seeing it? Is it someone's actually working in the back office and not in the front? Is it that someone's actually on the other side of the railroad tracks or on the other side of the bridge, and the other side just happens to have more folks of color, more folks, trans folks or gender nonconforming folks? And those are the barriers I think that we need to educate ourselves about.
Yeah, and jumping off what you said about visibility too, I think I'm sure you were about to recommend to Disclosure, the Netflix documentary, which I watched because Emmett told me to watch it. And one of the big points there is not just that we need to elevate a specific representation, but that we need more representation so that more people have a more diverse view of what it means to be any one thing, because anyone holding any specific identity can never speak for everyone holding that identity. And I think that a lot of times people feel like, well, if I'm an activist, that means I have to run for office, or I have to be a writer, or I have to organize rallies. And those are all really important things. But it's also, if you are an actor or a director or somebody who hires someone or somebody who, you know, creates art or media, there's a great art consultant out of California named Beth Pickens who wrote this pamphlet that you can download called Making Art Against Fascism, and sort of was put out there during this political moment about hearing all these artists saying like, well, can I continue to be an artist because there's so much politically happening? I feel like I need to quit being an artist and go out and run for office or something. That's what everyone's saying I need to do. And she was saying like, no, whatever it is that you do, you can bring in education and visibility of your community and the issues that you care about through your art. And it was actually a theater piece that sparked one of the op-eds that I wrote. I was at the music hall and watching this dance performance, and this young woman had written this piece to highlight the fact that freezing is an incredibly common reaction to sexual assault. And she talked about how, you know, we always hear about fight or flight, but it's actually 3 different common reactions. There's fight, flight, and freeze. And for a lot of people, myself included, who have been sexually assaulted and have had that experience where your body reacts by freezing, there's so much shame that comes around that, because you feel like, well, I didn't do enough, and I didn't, you know, fight enough, or whatever it is that the media has depicted as, you know, an active rape, to quote a terrible politician. But, you know, to know that that's a common experience, and to see that in a dance performance, in a theater performance that was already connecting, you know, on an emotional and aesthetic level, to learn that scientific information really completely changed the way, you know, I viewed my experience. And then I ended up writing about that, thinking like, well, people have to know about this. That seems to be like the common theme of anytime I get really fired up to write about something, it's because I've just learned a piece of new information that I know other people have my experience might not know. So I ended up writing that piece and got really a huge reaction. It has started a lot of conversations even within my family. But that's just like another example of people that could use art and creativity as activism. And even if it's something as simple as sharing your experience with something around sexual assault or domestic violence, that can be a really positive way that you can use, you know, whatever creative abilities you have to be an activist.
So I'm going to jump in real quick. This has been an excellent conversation thus far. I can't believe how many comments are coming through the chat room validating what you all are saying, which is fantastic. And it was really interesting to hear how much commonality you all have, yet still so much difference. And I'm wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about something that we talked about as we were preparing for the session this morning. And that was sort of that what we've been taught, it really hasn't been necessarily true. And how do we move past that? How do we use this opportunity as a moment to help educate people that might still believe that the history books that we all read in school didn't necessarily contain the full truth?
So I guess I'll start. So one of the, I'm so glad you said that, because one of the things that was really shocking when I decided to host the rally that I did in Portsmouth was someone came up to me and said, well, if you in some sense attacked my patriotism, and it always brings up a good line that I've heard, that is, you know, racism is so American that when you protest it, they think you're protesting America. And I was quoted the other day because the journalist reached out to me and said, you know, with all the conversation about Juneteenth, which is, you know, is not new, are you going to celebrate 4th of July? And I said, you know, I don't really like my stepdad, but I still go to his birthdays. So you can love things about America, and you can love America as a whole and want it to be better. It's the same way that you love your children, but you help them develop better skills to be better adults, to lead better lives and to help other people. And so and I get infuriated at people that think because you question the status quo that you think everyone is bad, that I now hate every white person. Well, my mother is white, my husband is white, you know what I mean? And it's this crazy sense that, you know, again, I bring it back to people saying that if you protest something or injustice, then you hate America. Because I say Black Lives Matter, I'm not saying everyone's life doesn't matter. I'm saying that we live in a cul-de-sac and my house is on fire. And as my neighbor, why would you not want to help me? Because when my house is not on fire and yours is, I'm going to help you. Because it's a human issue, right? It's a humanity's issue. If you see a young trans individual being bullied, if you see people saying hurtful, awful things, it is our job as humans to step in. There's a crazy phenomenon that goes on in the world that I will never understand, and it's called the bystander effect, that we assume someone else has called 911. We assume somebody else will step in. And, you know, to share a little bit, as Crystal did, I was a sexual assault victim, and there were bystanders that didn't do anything. I called out for help and people assumed somebody else is gonna help. And I think I kind of I will speak for everyone on this panel that we are not bystanders. And for me, when I do events like this and speak, and what I lead people with is, please don't be a bystander in any form of oppression, in any form of segregation, and in any form of hate. I'm not asking anyone to have all the right answers, because I don't have the answers. People ask me questions all the time. Well, what should I do in this scenario? And how should I respond to this racist comment or this, you know? I'm also a Black woman, you know, so there's an added level to that. How should I handle this sexist comment or this or this? I don't have all the answers. I can tell you my truth, how I would want to respond, but potentially a response for me is not going to do it for Najee or Crystal or Emmett or anyone in a different community. I just really get worked up of that. It's a human issue. Put yourself in somebody else's shoes. The uncomfortableness of having to come out to your parents, to have those internal conversations that are really, really rough to have with yourself. And so I guess I'll pass the buck.
I'm gonna jump right in. Joe, that was amazing, as usual. James Baldwin, there's a clip of James Baldwin floating around the internet right now talking about the way America sees like Black people, and he's talking about how the statement "give me liberty or give me death" when it's said by a white man, it's seen as patriotic, but when it's said by a Black man, it's like, whoa, what are we doing here? Is he gonna go and riot? And it's like, it's that fear of Black people. And the funny thing is about Black people, if you really think about it, we are the most patriotic people in this country. And the reason why is because we built this country and we're still here. We're still here making it work. We're still here trying to make it better. Every movement has benefited off the back of the civil rights movement. Every movement. But yet we're still fighting for Black Lives Matter. And that's crazy for me. Like, look at the way, and talking about re-education, I'm so glad that you brought that up, Lori. Look at the way that we label the Black Panthers as a terrorist group. The food program that we have in schools now was created by the Black Panthers. When the Black Panthers was originally created, they were training white youth on how to go into the community and better the community. They were training youth and empowering youth of all colors. But guess what? We labeled them a terrorist group, took all of their programs and said, you know what? Yeah, we're just gonna, put the images out there with you on a gun with guns and completely ruin the history and everything that you built. And that's the nature of this country. We talk about King and X. King Martin Luther King and Malcolm X came to a very similar conclusion. Of course, Malcolm X did it before in 1965. They came to a very similar conclusion, both at the times of their deaths, that the problem is poverty. Martin Luther King, when he was, I love Martin Luther King, just because I see him as a radical, and I study this stuff all the time. The Poor People's Movement, the Poor People's Campaign, oh my God, what he was about to do, even the first meeting that they had, he brought poor white people, he brought poor Native Americans, he brought poor Latin people, poor Mexican people, poor Asian people, all in one room. And then we wonder why this man got killed, because he stopped fighting for just the rights of Black people. And all we remember is, I have a dream. And here's a man who was just, he had a dream because he was being oppressed and all this stuff. No, he became a little bit more radical towards his stuff. Yes, he stood by nonviolence and all that other stuff, but he became a little bit more understanding about Black power and all the stuff that we're trying to figure out right now. But we need to re-educate ourselves about these people. We keep preaching that by any means necessary, Malcolm X, but towards his death, he literally prayed with white people. He began to why are we doing that? Why are we doing that over and over and over again? But there needs to be a re-education in American history, and we need to talk truthfully about who these people were and not make them these godlike figures, and make them human. Really teach our children about these people, because they're American. And like Joe said, we all want to see this country get better. I want to see this country get better. This is why I will continue to fight for this country. I'm America. I love America. I really do. But America got a lot of issues. America's like a bad habit. We got to get it right. And it's we got to get it right together. So I'm done. But
Yeah, I love that you brought up the patriotism thing too. There's two books. One is Good and Mad by Rebecca Traister, and the other is Eloquent Rage by Brittany Cooper. And speaking about, I remember from Good and Mad, she talks about how, I believe she even used that "give me liberty or give me death" speech as oh, look, when a white man says up and is angry, it's patriotic. But for a woman to do it, it's very, very different. And she uses some examples of some early women that were speaking up in the labor movement. And I believe the example that she used is that motherhood was one of the only ways that we would perceive it to be patriotic or okay for a woman to be upset if she's coming from a place of motherhood. And we're seeing this right now with the moms, you know, at the front line in Portland, and all of a sudden this motherhood identity is suddenly bringing a new focus to it. And, you know, it's been pointed out that Black mothers have been doing this for years. There's been Black mothers coming forward, Trayvon's mother, Eric Garner's mother. You know, that's really where Black Lives Matter started from, is the mothers, the Black mothers of these murdered young Black children. So it's very interesting to see, like, who do we perceive as patriotic? Who do we perceive as a mother? Who do we perceive as worth protecting? Yeah, all of that came up for me too.
I think just to I mean, maybe cap this part, you know, and I'm obviously much more of like a local, go local. And I think a lot of the concepts and ideas that Najee was saying, to me, I think need to happen on a local level. I mean, a lot of, you know, folks here are leaders. This is Leadership Seacoast, whether that's nonprofit leaders, government leaders. I think the work of acknowledging, identifying, and working against systemic inequities, systemic injustice, is that we all have to pick up the mantle of being mythbusters. I think a lot of times we just sit back and accept that, oh, well, this is how it is here. And, oh, you know, like, immigration is a perfect example. We always talk about the southern border. We always talk about the immigration challenges in the southern border. If you go to Stratford County, the detention center is completely filled with people that are Black and brown that don't speak English as their first language. And they are people that, prior to being put in that detention center, most of them were in our communities, you know, very productive, engaged members of our communities, or maybe not what we felt was our communities, but their communities in the Seacoast region. And so I think we tell a lot of myths about where the problems are and how to address them. You know, I think certainly this may sound like a nerdy point, but check out the census once it's done. I mean, that's going to start to tell us how things have changed in our backyards and in our communities about who's living here. And I think so much as leaders, and, you know, I obviously I talked about, you know, food service and restaurants and Main Street businesses, but a lot of times our routines are what keeps us within our white circles. They're what keeps us within our straight circles. They're what keeps us within our cisgender circles, because those routines have been built over many years of our parents and other generations about where you shop, where you eat, where you pray, where you study, etc. And as leaders, it doesn't feel comfortable. It may feel like you're not invited, but you got to break those routines a little bit. You got to start identifying, you know, there are people, there are communities, there are neighborhoods, there are businesses, there are churches that are filled with people that don't look like you, that don't sound like you. And it's not that you're not invited there, it's that your routines have kept you on the same path, and then telling the same stories, and then telling your kids those stories, and then that gets passed on. And so I think for me, I think about being an activist is about kind of changing the story a little bit. And just as like one small example, you know, here in Somersworth, growing up, didn't have a great reputation. Rochester didn't have a great reputation. The things we said, the things people said about our communities didn't sound so great. Over the last several years, I've heard people now referring to Somersworth as the Rainbow City, as a city that celebrates LGBTQ community. And that's like a lot of great wins, you know, openly gay mayor. We have the gayest city council in the state of New Hampshire that has been certified by our state government. Lots of queer-owned businesses and so forth. And that's great. That's a different story than what was told when I was a kid. But I recently had, you know, last year, I had a community police officer come into Teetotaler, my cafe, and say, hey, I have an issue. And I was like, okay, a cop telling me he has an issue, what's up? And he says, there's all this talk about being the Rainbow City, and where's the LGBTQ clinic? Where is the LGBTQ health services? Where are, you know, and he kind of rattled off all of these things, you know, structural, institutional things that we don't have in Somersworth. And it was true, because he was working with someone who was I think he had, you know, gone to a home for a call, and there was a trans man there that had, you know, alleged some form of discrimination and abuse related to that. And he did not feel equipped, this cop didn't feel equipped to address it. And so for me, the story of describing ourselves as the Rainbow City is really step one, because then that trickles down into our institutions, into our halls of government, into our policing, into our education system, to actually then ask the question, well, how do we continue this? How do we celebrate this? How do we support this? And so I think, as leaders, it really starts with, busting those myths and telling a different story, because that's going to then get all of these institutional players, all of these small business owners that are also going to start asking those questions, also going to start wondering about what their communities and who's in their community and what it's made of. And I think that's it starts with us and how we bust those myths and tell those stories.
Yeah, just to wrap that together, what you said about policymakers with Lori's original question too about re-education, school boards and curriculums are so huge in this too. I mean, I just saw somebody posted who works in the Rochester school system a photo of the top of a book that was framing Indigenous people in America as noticing that some of the new colonizers coming in needed space, and so they moved out, and it was just framed as like, oh, more people are here, let's move over here so that they can have room, and just like the complete factless framing of that, instead of the systematic murder of millions and millions of Indigenous people is so egregious that is in our local textbooks. Go to your school boards and make sure that our curriculum is telling a more factual history.
Thank you. And I'm so happy that you guys are keeping this as a local conversation. We know this is obviously a nationwide challenge, but we have to start in our own community. So I really appreciate that you're keeping that in mind.
We're a chatty group here. I like it.
All right. So does anybody have a burning desire to share what was discussed in their breakout group? And you can just go ahead and either use the raise your hand feature, just unmute yourself.
I'd be happy to share a little bit of feedback from the group that I was in. This is Janet Guin. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Janet.
A couple of people who shared from their perspective as white males, a recognition of the white privilege that they've benefited from. Conversation about understanding the difference between equality and equity, recognizing that that as members of the white community, there's a responsibility to be leading the work for racial equality, that it's not something that should be left to only the Black community or people of color, that white privilege also brings with it a responsibility to advocate and take up the mantle for change. And then for someone who's gone through life as a Black woman, feeling judged at times as a child, as a parent, as a professional colleague, having to learn to sort of live a double consciousness in order to survive in two different cultures. On the one hand, sort of the need to assimilate and to be able to survive in white culture, but also feeling a burden and responsibility to carry the torch for people of color and for the Black community, sort of as something that's been handed down from her ancestors, and feeling a responsibility to do right by them. So that all told, and particularly living in some place like Maine and New Hampshire, can lead to a real sense of loneliness in carrying that shared mantle. And I hope I represented what people said appropriately. Please feel free to weigh in if I captured something in the wrong way.
Thank you, Janet. Yeah, so true, right? That feeling of loneliness, that has to be a heavy weight to bear. Would anybody else like to share what they discussed in their group?
I can share. Oops, sorry.
Okay, who do we got? Alicia?
Yeah.
Hey.
Hi. My group was majority women, so a lot of it, I think, had a theme of just being either challenged in terms of your ability to have knowledge on something because of the industry that you work in, or being passed over in a group because there are men at the table, so let's not listen to the woman. And then Najee shared a really an experience that just like broke my heart as well. So I think that ours was, because it was majority women, that was a lot about gender, but then it was good to have a conversation from different perspectives and see the similarities and differences.
I imagine, I didn't participate in a small group, I stayed out, but I imagine that a lot of you probably, hopefully, enjoyed the opportunity to have the time to share some thoughts and feelings about this topic. And sometimes the more we talk about these issues, the more we realize we have in common and the less differences we have. And they, obviously, it can be a very emotionally charged conversation, but we are probably all a lot more alike than we are different. And hopefully that came through in your conversations. We have time maybe for one more share if anybody's interested.
Yeah, I can share.
All right. Hi, Mary.
Hi. So we started our discussion talking about like myths and myth busting and how each of us have connected with that, and just how a lot of us haven't found ourselves in interacting with communities of color being from New Hampshire mostly. And then I also shared my experience. I go to school in New York City, so sharing that kind of different worldview has been so eye-opening. And someone actually said in like a situation I was in, like, oh, you're from New Hampshire, you're from the North, like it's so liberal there, it's so like forward thinking. And it just was so interesting and got me thinking about how there is so much misinformation and so many generalizations. And it really makes me think, going back to what Najee said earlier about how it is our responsibility to want to learn more and want to be involved. And I just think that is such, a good example of that. There's so many generalizations, so much misinformation, that it needs to be our responsibility to be learning more and actually want to be learning more rather than just spreading myths and generalizations.
Amen. Bravo. And that's really, that's the goal of Leadership Seacoast. For those of you that have gone through the program, I'm sure you are sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, like I'm connecting so many dots between arts and culture and economic development and education, and how all of these topics of study relate to one another, particularly when it comes to race, equity, diversity, inclusion. So that's really a beautiful thing about Leadership Seacoast, is that that's our goal, is to keep learning and bust those myths and make our community a better place to be. So I think it's time to just open it up to general Q&A. Just to keep it sort of organized, we would love it if you could put your questions into the chat feature, and the amazing Mr. Zach Little is happy to manage it from there. If you have something that you is more confidential and you would rather us ask the question for you, that's fine. Otherwise, you're welcome to ask the question yourself. But just to make sure that we keep things organized. Joanna, is there anything that you want to say, as I know that your time here with us is probably coming to a close?
Yeah, I have to hop off early. So if anyone has any direct questions for me, if you want to kind of toss those out, I only have a few more moments and then I have to hop off. But I want to thank you all so much. And I want to thank Lori and Leadership Seacoast for these opportunities and conversations. I'm working with SAC right now, which is, again, the Seacoast African American Cultural Center, to work on building a town hall series, obviously virtual for now, that has more conversations based around race, equality, and kind of just everything we can put on the table. Oh, I see a question that someone threw in there. Am I involved in any so as Najee said, I am one of the leads in his play, The Bus Stop, that will be at the Seacoast Rep, started on August 13th, which feels really quick. I am also on the board of directors and a volunteer for the Pop-Up New Hampshire, formerly known as Pop-Up Portsmouth. Thank you. The Bridge Street Lot project, and that we are hoping to open on the 30th of this month. So you'll see a lot of that work happening within the next week and a half. So those are kind of my main focuses right now.
Jo, thank you so much for being here today.
I'm going to pop off. Thank you all so much. Feel free to, if anyone ever wants to have a one-on-one conversation, I'm always available. Feel free to email me, joe@cupofjoenh.com. I love conversations like this. I love obviously talking. It's kind of like my favorite pastime. So thank you all so much for participating, and I hope to meet you all and see you all from 6 feet apart sometime soon.
Thanks, Jo.
Thank you.
So I see a question popped in talking about how to have these conversations with children. And there's actually an event this evening, a virtual event being hosted by Seacoast Moms. I believe it starts at 7 p.m. I happened to see it come across my Facebook feed, I think. So again, that's Seacoast Moms. We can make sure that we put it in the chat. I know that that's happening tonight. I don't know if any of the panelists know.
It's actually a 3-night series, so it's tonight and then next Tuesday and next Thursday. So if you can't make it tonight, it's a 3-part series.
Thank you, Crystal. It's 8:30 tonight. Okay.
Yeah, 8:30.
Great question. Yeah, so we need to talk to the young people, right?
Well, and maybe just to add to that, and it's something Erica in our breakout room raised it, and not to tease the person that asked the question, but I think it's not so much about talking to our children, but listening to our children. I think a lot of the youth, and this was mentioned in our panel, are far more scrubbed up on all of this than you would probably believe. And we probably, parents think, well, this is something I need to protect them, I need to educate them and so forth, and may not recognize the world that they inhabit and live in. And just as like a very small anecdote to this, one of the things my cafe has become probably the most known for is we have the largest teen drag show in America that takes place here. And if you're wondering what a teen drag show is, it's all the performers are teenage, although the audience is all ages. Not something I expected to do when I built this little cafe here, but it has exploded because it's our busiest event, and though it's all ages, it tends to predominantly be high school age kids in the audience, packing the house, really in support and celebration of this like very extravagant, flamboyant, excessive art form. And, I tell people that story. I'm always like, oh, the teen drag show. And they're like, oh, okay, like teetotaler, like gay audience, very queer. And yet the group of folks that enjoy it, that come to these things are predominantly, presumably, they're young, cisgender, straight teenagers that just love an environment and in a venue to celebrate their peers, celebrate these ideas. And I always come away with this feeling in these small moments that the real success and the real activism is not just these, teen performers that are great at making costumes and putting on makeup and putting their mixes together and doing lots of splits. It's actually the experience of the teenage townies that are sitting in the audience having a shared experience of difference, a shared experience of celebrating difference in a way that they will take with them, whether they end up in a boardroom or a courtroom, or wherever they go off to, and have a moment of, not policing the boundaries of what counts, for gender, what counts for difference. It's really just a celebratory thing. And so I think a lot of times, probably many of your children have been to that show or been to one of those shows. And I often think about many of your kids are doing the work themselves. And there's an opportunity, I think, to actually learn about, what are to keep using this concept, what are the myths that they've been busting as teenagers in their local public schools and local high schools that older generations, parents never got the chance to hear about? So I would just sort of add that as a sort of two-way street.
And I would recommend the Black Heritage Trail runs tea talks in February and spilling over into March every year, and sometimes they do them throughout the year as well. But I always block off my Sunday afternoons in February and the first couple Sundays in March. Those are probably the most enlightening conversations that happen every year here on the Seacoast, specifically around race. And a lot of times education topics come up. A lot of times, you know, things specific to women come up. I mean, there's a lot of different intersections that they explore in those talks, but just going to those tea talks and learning about whatever the topic is, there's always an annual theme, and then they talk about a specific topic each Sunday. They're really, really educational, and a lot of times they do filter down into, I think somebody in the comments said education sort of is the thing it all boils down to, if we can address that. So a lot of the conversations do end up going back to how we can update our education here in the schools, or just take it upon ourselves as parents to do some of this work as well.
So just a shameless plug, Green Acre by high school has been one of the organizations leading this conversation since the 1800s. The first race amity conference happened right here on this lawn, and we've all been about, you know, anti-racism and understanding. It's probably one of the most diverse places I've been to as a Black man from New York City, and it has educated me so much just living up here. One of the things that I'm personally doing, one of the things that you can take upon yourself to do, you're talking about, you know, educating children. I have a couple of local youth that I'm doing a book club with. We're reading Stamped from the Beginning. And they're about 11 years old. And here's the thing, like, I'm not doing most of the talking. They're doing most of the talking. They understand. And I was with a parent yesterday. It was Tuesday, yeah. Oh, Tuesday was 2 days ago, sorry. So as she was talking about trying to convince the school system to change some of the books, because, you know, and she was like, I want my child to know what's going on, you know, in this world, but they're so worried about keeping this information from them. And I said, well, as a kid, I didn't have the privilege to have the information be, you know, kept from me. I was living in it, you know? And I think it's important to you know, I mean, they're going to be humans in the world. And the first thing they're going to feel is that somebody lied to them. You know, somebody lied to me my whole life and told me that the world was this way, and now I'm finding out something else. So let's avoid that. Let's like, you know, give them some information and have a dialogue with them. Let's talk about race in our homes. And I think it's about having the conversation. Or what do you think about this? They'll begin to talk to you. They'll begin to tell you what they think. They feel it. They're in school. And if they're not hearing it from you, they're going to hear it from their friends. And you don't want same thing with sexual education. You don't want them to be misinformed. You want them to know at least something. So yeah, do the job, parents. Like, do the job as much as you can. It's as simple as asking them how they feel about it. And yeah, starting the conversation from there. And books, yeah, and having book studies with your children or local children.
Yeah, and if you're looking at one of those lists of great children's books, consider requesting them from the library at the same time you're purchasing them, so that everyone else in your community is seeing those books on the shelves in their libraries as well.
Excellent point, Crystal. So I'm wondering if the panel would mind giving maybe your favorite book, and I know that's probably a really loaded question because having one favorite is tough, or a podcast that you follow, or a TED Talk you've listened to, or a movie you've watched, or some resources for the people that are here this morning. And we'll make sure that we curate this list so that we can share it out with anybody who's interested in it, so that you don't have to be frantically jotting down this information.
Yeah, I can start. I'm going to break your rule right off the bat and go with 3 because I brought 3 good book recommendations. The first one is Feminism is for Everybody by Bell Hooks. Definitely talking in an intersectional frame before intersectionality was really coined, but Feminism is for Everybody is a book that right off the bat will in the very first chapter, I mean, I will just say, just read the first chapter. It will feel like less of an assignment, and then you won't be able to help reading the rest of the book. But even the first chapter really frames feminism as, you know, this is not anti-male. It does need to have a lens of race and of class and of disability and all the other things. So I think Feminism is for Everybody by Bell Hooks is a great introduction to sort of looking at these multifaceted conversations. The second is Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. And in particular, there's an essay in there called The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action. So the book is Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. And then Women, Race, and Class by Angela Davis is exactly what it sounds like, sort of an examination of all those 3 different things intersecting. And I'll paste the title and authors into the chat as well.
Thanks, Crystal.
Though I got anxious when you first asked us, like, when's the last time I read a book after running a restaurant for 10 years? But one thing that I got really into that may at first not seem like it intersects here. So I'm 10 years sober and in long-term recovery, and I've done a lot of work in recovery. And several years ago, wanting to educate myself more about the history of it, particularly here in New Hampshire, we seem to hear a lot about it. And I read a book called Chasing the Scream. And one of the most fascinating historical viewpoints into the opioid epidemic is that it has really been generated and built on a racist administration and the racist FBI and war on drugs, which was basically started with an attempt to kill Billie Holiday. And it draws a very direct line around the experiences of the Black community in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and using the so-called war on drugs to police communities of color, which did ultimately, unfortunately, lead to the demise of Billie Holiday and continues to this day. And so it is an incredibly fascinating view, historical perspective, both into how the war on drugs was built out of a racist administration, but also connects the dots to how we can think about substance use disorders today, even here at home.
Awesome. Thank you, Emmett.
One of the documentaries that I keep rewatching is King in the Wilderness. Are you guys familiar with that documentary?
Oh.
It's a documentary about the last 3 years of Martin Luther King's life. Yeah, and I just found this YouTube link, and it actually has each interview from each, like Jesse Jackson, John Lewis, all of them. Like, they have their individual interviews for like 2 hours long. I can find a way to send it to you. I've been watching those over and over again. So you can watch the whole documentaries and you can watch these isolated interviews. And just hearing, I think that a lot of us are redoing or trying to redo the work that these people have done before without literally going back to our ancestors or the people who have been doing it literally for, the first, I don't know, forever. Instead of just seeing and evaluating and really studying what they tried to do. And I think for me, it's literally going back in the past and saying, okay, what worked and what didn't work in this fight towards equality. And I've been studying that over and over again. It's been so enlightening. Just understanding, Martin Luther King as a human through the eyes of these individuals who walked with him every single day. But yeah.
So there's some great questions coming in through the chat room. And I like this one. Knowing how much work you guys put into being activists and keeping yourselves educated and educating others, that can be exhausting. So what sort of mental health tips, tricks do you have? What sort of self-care do you partake in? Emmett's like, none. I don't know what that means. No, but in all seriousness, how is it that you keep yourself healthy so that you can continue to do this important work?
Long walks. I like long walks, and I tend to speed walk. It's funny that you brought that up, because Angela Davis, when I first met her, she was talking about radical self-care. And it's different from this, like, oh, mama, self-care, but yeah, I really try to invest in myself and like give myself the time that I need. If I need to cut off, I will cut off. I will spend time by myself. I dance a lot in the morning. I was a dancer before I did theater. So I dance a lot in the morning to music, and I pray a lot. And I'm always try to communicate with my ancestors and the people that come before me, and just recognize that they're with me, and I'm not in this alone, even though I'm in this region right now by myself with no family. Just understand it, and just being in touch with my friends, and like not allowing every conversation with my friends to be about this. I don't want it to be about this with my friends. I want to talk about movies and television shows and all that other good stuff.
Okay, well, I guess I was going to say I don't have an answer, Lori, but knowing that Najee's a dancer, I love dancing, and I think it truly is, it's meditative, it's energizing. But another point I do want to make, and this is going to sound like I'm refusing to answer the question, I think sometimes we have to think about activism as work, and I don't always feel that way. So much of the time when I am scrubbing dishes or fixing broken restaurant equipment, that is work, and I never love it, And the times that I get to use, whether it's my business, my platform, my aspirations and activism, to connect and build community, to bear witness to injustices that are happening at immigration detention facilities, they don't feel like work. And I don't think that social justice always has to feel like work. I think engaging and activating people, connecting with people, having conversations with folks, for me is fulfilling. For me, it is what feeds my soul. What keeps me in the smallest city in New Hampshire is the people. And so I kind of sometimes resist the idea of, well, I need a moment to relax. I'm an extrovert. Being around people energizes me. And so when I can find ways to couple that, I want to get away from the idea that it's always hard work in the terms of it actually hurts or it actually feels like stress and struggle. I think there are a lot of ways, particularly when you think about, setting up performances and building events, that it can actually be fulfilling and it can feel really energizing. But I do love to dance, and that's a great exercise.
I have so much to say on this topic. It's hard to pick any single response, but I mean, certainly what Najee said about reading about people who've gone before and realizing that we are not creating this wheel. It's been created. It's just been hidden by those in power. And a lot of people like Audre Lorde have been writing about self-care, and the act of self-care is activism for a really long time. And I think taking your ego out of it and realizing that you're not the one that's going to solve it, you need to make space for other people to step up and do the work as well, is what's going to build a sustainable movement. And the only way that we're going to continue to go forward is if we are taking care of ourselves and it's a sustainable movement. I definitely think that framing things as, something that's going to span generations, it can either be a very depressing realization or an encouraging realization to realize that we're not going to solve this in our lifetimes. It's been going on for generations. It will continue in generations. And you just have to find what is the thing that you are the best suited to do with your unique skills and voice and talents, and just focus on that.
Awesome. So I think we've got about 7 minutes left. Let's just check if there's one more question we can kind of whip through before we move to closing comments. Lots of really great resources in here. 13th is getting a lot of press in the chat room.
Can I pull out a question?
Yeah.
I just really don't want this to be overlooked. So there's a question from a deputy county attorney at the Rockingham County Attorney's Office They say 2 of us are here today to try to listen and learn more about steps we can take to address racial injustice in the criminal justice system. This is something that I'm trying to convene in Somersworth as well, community conversations around what public safety looks like. And I just want to give Najee the opportunity as well, because I know that you're doing these conversations with law enforcement agencies right now, but just really would encourage any sort of broad community conversation to get that going. It's something that I brought up in public city council comments at the close of one of our meetings, and I did get some responses from people in the community who just wouldn't have otherwise known that their elected officials, or in this case, their county attorneys, are thinking about this. So I think putting out something into the community that even just says this is something that we're looking for, if there are other people in the community that are interested in this or have their personal stories to share to this, you know, invite them. Maybe it will have to be virtual right now, or it can be some sort of outdoor thing, but getting that community conversation started so that you know what the current issue is in the community and what it looks like for people who are dealing with it every day is really important. But I want to hear from Najee as well with the work that you've done with the local PD.
Yeah. Well, Robert's here, right? Hi, Robert. Robert, me and Robert and a couple of others from Green Acre have been meeting with the Elliott Police Department. Robert, I can share about this, right? Give me a thumbs up if I can. Okay, great. And having these conversations about the oneness of all mankind, and just literally diving into some writings and some philosophies, and the work has been spectacular. One of the things, and not, you know, I'm not going to mention any names. It's literally the whole police department, and they've been coming to us saying, okay, well, we want to learn as much as possible. And first of all, I commend the Elliott Police Department for reaching out to us to want to learn more about racial justice. And what I'm finding is that there's just a lot of miseducation. They didn't know about Black National Anthem. They was like, well, is this a new song? And we're like, no, this was created in 1905. Talking about, you know, their despair and how they feel as police officers living in this climate where everyone is now judging them. And that's interesting because as a Black man, I've always felt judged. But now they're understanding the how we feel, and then talking about Black Lives Matter and talking about things like 9/11. A comment that came out was this country was so united during 9/11. I said, well, what about the Arab Americans who were being tortured in schools? And then like, whoa, I didn't think about that. And just watching the transformation just by the shared experience, even with me as a Black man, I didn't have positive relationships with the police department in New York City. No, I didn't. But now I'm developing these positive relationships through discourse. And when we see each other, we socially distance hug. like a couple of youth that was in the production of Hair at Seacoast Rep with me were driving through Elliott the other day, and they were stopped by an officer. And they said that was the most positive interaction they had with an officer ever. And there were 2 Black people in the car. And it was like, well, we don't know what you're doing with this police department, but through discourse, they're learning so much. And I'm in love with this process. We're not just meeting 3 times. It's been discussed that now we'll meet until we have to stop. And just, I don't know. I think this is the way we need to go. We're not going to get rid of police. As simple as that. We can defund them. We can do all that, but we have to live with these people, and these are human beings too. And I've never outwardly say, oh, I'm pro-police or anything like that, because that's not, my experience doesn't allow for me to say that. But I do believe in the power of discourse, and I do believe in the power of conversation and sharing experiences and sharing my version of America and their version of America, and literally coming together to make one conclusion and providing a sense of hope for this country, because despair is really the atmosphere right now. Everyone is in despair. I'm sorry, we got like 2 minutes left, but everyone's in despair. And I'm trying to help them remain hopeful. And I'm telling them, well, you control the image of the experience that people are, you know, you're controlling the environment that people are experiencing right now. So if you want children to look at you differently, then go out there and do things with children. Go play baseball, go have positive interactions with people. If you're feeling like the world is against you right now, then you have the power to go change that and remain hopeful. Don't act out of despair, because if you act out of despair, we're all in trouble. We're all in trouble. And yeah, that's it. That's where I'm at right now. I hope I answered your question correctly.
Najee, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing too. Crystal and Emmett, I want to give you a minute each to just give your closing comments and get these people that so graciously shared their time with us this morning back to their regular scheduled activities.
Yeah, so I just dropped this in the chat as well. I was trying to like peek at some of the questions we didn't get to and provide a little chat answer. So I hope that was helpful. But I would just say, particularly when it comes to having difficult conversations, that, you know, if you're worried that somebody doesn't agree with you, just maintaining curiosity is something that I always try to stick with, instead of disbelief or outrage. Really trying to be like, I wonder why this person thinks this way, or I have to practice this with my family a lot. I'm very different ideologically than everybody else in my family, and just trying to come back to that curiosity is a way that I can sort of like remain calm and continue to have that conversation. But yeah, I just want to encourage you all to, you know, use Google, use people that you see that are active already in your community, and just reach out and ask. But yeah, just keep learning and maintaining curiosity.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was actually going to use my closing to answer the question that Crystal just wrote in the chat and answered. But I wanted to say something about it, because there was a question about, you know, as young elected or government people, how do you work in local government when you're not qualified enough or educated on everything? And Crystal's the only elected leader among us currently. And I think the thing is that I continue to see is it isn't a matter about being the most educated or not, or being the most qualified or not. When we look to our local young leaders, it's whether or not they're willing to ask questions or not. Because so much when we talk about entrenched forms of power, it's that people have already assumed, and it's almost like that bystander concept, that it's already been solved. And I actually think what the biggest asset of people, especially younger folks that are running for office or that are elected, is that they are willing to ask questions. They are willing to say, well, why don't we have a police commission? Even if for 20 years, all the city councilors or whomever were fine without there being a police commission. And I think it's more important now to have that curiosity, to be busting those myths, that if you just assume it's education and qualifications, then you won't actually be asking the questions that will lead to changing systems that we all acknowledge need to be changed. And so I think for whomever asked the question, if it's about, you know, young leaders not having everything, it's not whether you know everything or have been uneducated on everything. It's whether you are the type of leader that's willing to ask questions or going to assume that it's already been addressed. And so I think in all the work we do as leaders, that curiosity is much more powerful in dismantling systemic injustices than being just educated or just qualified.
Well said. Oh, snaps. All right, you guys, I knew that the 2 hours was going to go by quickly, and it sure did. Thank you first to the panelists, Crystal, Najee, Emmett, and Joe. I'm honored to know you as human beings, and thank you for the bottom of my heart for joining us this morning and sharing your wisdom with us. And to everyone who came this morning to listen and learn, thank you so much. It means a lot. Clearly, this is a topic that struck interest with a lot of people, so that's great. We're going to look forward to seeing what we can bring forward in the future. Hopefully, this is just the beginning of some conversations that we can keep having here, hosted by Leadership Seacoast. I encourage anyone who has not participated in the program, please, please, please check us out. It's a phenomenal experience. You can talk to any graduate of, I see a lot of head nodding, any graduate of Leadership Seacoast, how their experience has been, and what a life-changing experience it was for them. And if you need any sort of testimonials, I can point you in the right direction. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, and be safe and be well.
Thank you so much, Lori.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
guys.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.
And